For nearly a decade, it was one of the biggest mysteries in crypto. Who stole 50,000 bitcoins, which would ultimately be worth more than $3 billion, from a dark website called the Silk Road? No one knew until the man behind the crime made a costly mistake.
In 2012, someone stole 50,000 bitcoins from Silk Road, an illegal online marketplace on the darknet. Since then, the value of the stolen BTC has skyrocketed to over $3 billion. It has remained one of the biggest mysteries in the cryptocurrency world. However, light has recently been shed on this mystery.
Who is this guy, Jimmy, who is at the center of your story?
You know, he's a brilliant hacker and a brilliant coder. The investigators who met with him and talked to him said they saw his fingers flying across the keyboard as fast as they'd ever seen. He never used a mouse because he knew all the cheat codes.
In 2012, James Zhong, also known as Jimmy, was a 22 years old, and he was a student at the University of Georgia. He was unloved child of a divorced Chinese immigrant couple suffering from bullying, obesity, and undiagnosed autism spectrum disorder, and drug and alcohol addiction. Jimmy traveled from China to study in the United States. He pretended to be a wealthy student residing close to the University of Georgia in Athens. Jimmy, who was involved in the early development of Bitcoin, stumbled upon a software bug while withdrawing money from his account on Silk Road. Silk Road was an online darknet black market. In operation from approximately 2011 until 2013, Silk Road was used by numerous drug dealers and other unlawful vendors to distribute massive quantities of illegal drugs and other illicit goods and services to many buyers and to launder all funds passing through it. Jimmy used the Silk Road website to buy cocaine. On one September day, Jimmy decides to either buy heroin for a successful weekend, but he quitted this thankless task and finally withdraw all the money from the market. But after double-clicking the withdraw button from his Silk Road account, Jimmy suddenly discovers that the system has allowed him to withdraw double the amount of cryptocurrency, an amount that by definition was not in his wallet. After the first fraudulent withdrawal, Jimmy created new accounts, and with a few hours of work, he stole 50,000 bitcoins worth around $600,000. Prosecutors and lawyers are divided on this issue. Some have a different narrative, and they don't believe that it was just a withdrawal error. They think he planned the whole thing. Here is their view on what Jimmy did. They say in September 2012, Jimmy executed a scheme to defraud Silk Road of its money and property by firstly creating a string of approximately 9 Silk Road accounts, fraud accounts, in a manner designed to conceal his identity. Secondly, triggering over 140 transactions in rapid succession in order to trick Silk Road's withdrawal processing system into releasing approximately 50,000 Bitcoin from its Bitcoin-based payment system into his accounts. And thirdly, transferring this Bitcoin into a variety of separate addresses, also under his control, all in a manner designed to prevent detection, conceal his identity and ownership, and obfuscate the Bitcoin source. While executing the fraud, Jimmy did not list any item or service for sale on Silk Road, nor did he buy any item or service on Silk Road. Jimmy registered the accounts by providing the bare minimum of information required by Silk Road to create the account. The fraud accounts were merely a conduit for him to defraud Silk Road of Bitcoin, and he moved the stolen Bitcoins from one account to another for 8 years to cover his tracks. Jimmy funded the fraud accounts with an initial deposit of between 200 and 2,000 Bitcoin. After the initial deposit, he quickly executed a series of withdrawals. Through his scheme to defraud, he was able to withdraw many times more Bitcoin out of Silk Road than he had deposited in the first instance. Here is an example. On September 19, 2012, Jimmy deposited 500 Bitcoin into a Silk Road wallet. Less than 5 seconds after making the initial deposit, he executed 5 withdrawals of 500 Bitcoin in rapid succession within the same second, resulting in a net gain of 2,000 Bitcoin. Here is another example. A different fraud account made a single deposit and over 50 Bitcoin withdrawals before the account ceased its activity. Jimmy moved this Bitcoin out of Silk Road and in a matter of days consolidated them into 2 high-value amounts. Nearly 5 years after Jimmy's fraud, in August 2017, solely by virtue of Jimmy's possession of the 50,000 Bitcoin that he unlawfully obtained from Silk Road, Jimmy received a matching amount of a related cryptocurrency, 50,000 Bitcoin cash on top of the 50,000 Bitcoin. In August 2017, in a hard fork coin split, Bitcoin split into two cryptocurrencies, traditional Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. When this split occurred, any Bitcoin address that had a Bitcoin balance, as Jimmy's addresses did now have the exact same balance on both the Bitcoin blockchain and on the Bitcoin Cash blockchain. As of August 2017, Jimmy thus possessed 50,000 BCH, in addition to the 50,000 Bitcoin that he unlawfully obtained from Silk Road. Jimmy thereafter exchanged through an overseas cryptocurrency exchange all of the BCH crime proceeds for additional Bitcoin, amounting to approximately 3,500 Bitcoin of additional crime proceeds. Collectively, by the last quarter of 2017, Jimmy thus possessed approximately 53,500 Bitcoin of total crime proceeds. It all started on March 13, 2019, with a 911 phone call from Jimmy himself, who reported his home had been broken into and $400,000 in cryptocurrency had been stolen. This is one of the mistakes he made. You have $3 billion worth of stolen cryptocurrency, but you stress about the $400,000 that was stolen. This phone call he made will play a key role in the police investigation and will bring an end to a nearly decade-long manhunt and solve one of the biggest crimes of the crypto era. And it would also lead to the largest seizure of cryptocurrency by an individual in the history of the Department of Justice. Jimmy's emergency call that winter evening sent investigators down a long digital trail that led back to the earliest days of Bitcoin and revealed a dark truth about the universe of hackers and coders responsible for the creation of cryptocurrencies. It's a world where heroes and villains traded places and could even be the same people. None of it would go the way Jimmy wanted. The 911 call didn't produce a suspect in the theft from Jimmy's house. Athens police were dealing with one of their first crypto cases and were unfamiliar with the shadowy underworld, and they failed to make progress in the case. So Jimmy hired a local private investigator, Robin Martinelli, a former sheriff's deputy turned PI who owns and operates Martinelli Investigations in nearby Loganville, Georgia. Martinelli was far from an expert in crypto. She specialized in process serving, cheating spouses, and custody investigations, the type of probes that once got her firm featured on an episode of The Montel Williams Show. Robin Martinelli began by examining Jimmy's robust surveillance video archive of his home. In looking at the footage from the night of the crime, Martinelli spotted a slender male figure. She could tell that they had like a hood on, a gray hood, but then they had almost like a black ski mask. The suspect appeared to know his way around Jimmy's house, which led Martinelli to believe that he was a friend or at least someone who had heard Jimmy boast about his Bitcoin stash or knew where Jimmy kept the stash. From the video, Martinelli was able to determine the suspect's height and even the size of his hands. She began her investigation by putting Jimmy's friends under surveillance and following them to their homes and downtown bars on Broad Street and College Avenue. She put trackers on cars, scoured social media, and conducted background checks. Martinelli said Jimmy appeared resistant to her theories, especially when they began to focus on his circle of friends. Martinelli eventually settled on one suspect in particular, whom she believed had stolen 150 Bitcoins from Jimmy. At the time, that amount of digital currency was worth nearly $600,000. Jimmy didn't want to hear it. He got upset when Martinelli would kind of mention that somebody would have to have known where this cash was. And Martinelli understood why Jimmy was so hurt by the idea that someone close to him could have betrayed him.
Maybe,
They were using him?
I don't know if they really cared about Jimmy.
Yeah. Did he know that?
I don't think he knew that or wanted to know that. Jimmy wanted to be loved, or Jimmy wanted friends. Jimmy was a good guy.
On the other hand, Jimmy didn't know that a small group of agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit, led by officials in the same city, were painstakingly trying to solve a crime that dated back in years, a 2012 hack in which someone had stolen 50,000 Bitcoins from a site on the dark web. Over the years, the value of the Bitcoin stolen by the Silk Road hacker had increased to more than $3 billion. Investigators could track the location of the currency on the blockchain, which is a public ledger of all transactions, but they couldn't see the identity of the new owner of the funds. So they watched and waited for years as the hacker transferred funds from account to account, peeled some away, and pushed some of it through crypto mixers designed to obscure the source of the money. Finally, Chainalysis, a blockchain analytics company that was tracing the digital wallets containing the stolen Silk Road assets, saw the hacker made a tiny mistake. He transferred around $800 worth to a crypto exchange that followed established banking rules, including so-called Know Your Customer, processes requiring real names and addresses of account holders. The account was registered in Jimmy Zhong's name. The transaction took place in September 2019, 6 months after Jimmy's 911 call to the local police. That alone wasn't enough to prove that Jimmy was the hacker, but they had to be sure. So the IRS called the Athens-Clarke County Police Department and asked for some help. At the time, the police investigation into Jimmy's own crime report had been languishing. The IRS agent called Lieutenant Jody Thompson, who leads the local property and financial crimes unit. The IRS called Thompson to talk about Jimmy and the previous case of her housebreaking. After that call, Thompson joined forces with IRS CDI Special Agent Trevor McAleenan and Sean Magruder, CEO of a cyber intelligence company called BlockTrace. Magruder's company works with the IRS as an embedded contractor and was hired for its experience untangling complicated blockchain transactions. Together, these 3 investigators came up with a plan. They would approach Jimmy using a ruse, telling him they were investigating the crime that he called about, the one in which a thief had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars of his Bitcoin. In reality, they were investigating Jimmy for a crime they believed he had committed. Jimmy believed the police officer and the 2 specialists were there to help solve his crypto cold case. Playing on the ruse, the officers asked Jimmy to open his laptop and explain how he came to have the Bitcoin in the first place. Jimmy sat on the couch next to the investigators and entered his password. When he opened the laptop, law enforcement could see his Bitcoin wallet. He had $60 or $70 million worth of Bitcoins. The evidence was enough to convince the investigators that they were on the right track. The first visit allowed the investigators to obtain a federal search warrant for Jimmy's home. Before the officers raided the house, one officer had to explain to Jimmy that he wasn't really trying to help him. He was trying to convict him. Officers flooded into the home, cracking open every crevice in search of evidence. McAleenan said in an upstairs closet, they found a popcorn tin with a computer hidden inside that held millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. Using sniffer dogs trained to detect electronics, McAleenan said they found a safe buried in concrete under some basement floor tile. The safe contained precious metals, stacks of cash, and physical Bitcoins minted in the early years of crypto. They also found a wallet with Bitcoin from the original hack of Silk Road in 2012. They found the evidence that they were looking for, and Jimmy was arrested. Jimmy was charged with wire fraud. He pleaded guilty. In his statement to the judge before sentencing, Jimmy said having billions in stolen Bitcoin made him feel important. He was sentenced to 1 year and a day in federal prison. He began his sentence at the federal prison camp in Montgomery, Alabama, on July 14, 2023. In the end, Jimmy didn't get to keep the stolen Bitcoin. The U.S. government seized those assets. Officials opened a process that allowed victims of the hack to apply to get their Bitcoin back. However, nobody came forward to claim their Bitcoins. That's not surprising, given that users of Silk Road in 2012 were largely drug dealers and their customers. The federal government simply sold off the stolen Bitcoin and kept the proceeds. Some of the revenue generated will likely be shared with the Athens-Clarke County Police Department in recognition of the local officers' help in the case.